President Trump's chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn. He told me that economic growth can help pay down deficits. Roll tape.
We have to drive growth in our economy. At a 2% stagnant growth rate, we cannot create enough revenue to pay down our deficit. If we get our tax plan done and we get our regulatory reform done, we are going to have more money coming in because we're going to grow our economy and we're going to pay down our deficit.
Let me ask. Here with me now, former President Reagan's budget director and author of the book Trumped, David Stockman. All right, David. So, you know what? Grow the economy, and that's how you start to pay down these massive debts. What's wrong with that?
Well, if dogs could whistle, the world would be a chorus, okay? The point is, this is the same old story. It didn't work in the 1980s. It's not going to work now. Not because tax cuts are bad. It's because the CBO baseline is rosy scenario. In other words, we already
even their static baseline?
Yes, we already have more growth built in than we're likely to get, even with the tax cuts. If you look at that baseline, it's $10 trillion of new debt over the next 10 years before the tax cuts. What they proposed in their one-pager last week was $7.5 trillion between the 15% on corporate, 15% on pass-through, doubling the standard deduction, fewer brackets, and so forth. And I don't think they're going to get any reflow on that beyond what's already in the CBO baseline. So if you take the debt to $17.5 trillion of new borrowing in the next decade, what are you thinking?
But you say it didn't work in the 1980s. Everyone takes it as fact that it worked in the 1980s, that supply-side economics worked, and you should be the guy taking a victory lap.
Well, I should be taking a victory lap, but it didn't work because we cut taxes way too much, up to 6% of GDP in the first tax cut. That would be the equivalent today of $1.3 trillion. We couldn't cut domestic spending. We had this huge Reagan defense buildup that turns out wasn't necessary. And the bottom line is this. We had average growth in the 1980s and during the 12 years of Reagan-Bush. 3% real growth over those 12 years, same as the previous 20 years, no acceleration.
Although there were some amazing years. I mean, there were some 4.5%. I mean, there were some amazing GDP years back then, David.
Yeah, of course.
Why are you downplaying it when it's pretty clear? It was a great period. It was a great period for America's economy.
No, it wasn't. There was 2 or 3 years of accelerated growth because there was a massive deficit stimulus. This was a Keynesian stimulus that lasted from 84 to 87. But before that and after that, it was average. If you put it all together, it was average. But here's the point. Reagan started with $930 billion in national debt. He ended up with $2.7 trillion. In other words, he tripled the national debt.
And I know he always regretted that part of it, but I think the rest of it...
It's not a regret, Charles. It's not a regret. That is how you got those temporary years of growth, but they weren't sustainable.
The growth boom lasted over 10 years, though. Let me ask you about this.
No, it didn't. I'm telling you
you're not using GDP to judge how the growth went then. You're not saying...
Yes, I am using GDP because I cited the figures. 1980 to 1992, the GDP growth rate was 3.2%.
Let's not take 1980. Let's take after all of these things went through. You're taking 2 or 3 really bad years to skew what was an amazing run under Ronald Reagan and even after Ronald Reagan. I mean, listen, you don't want the credit, fine.
Okay.
Let me ask you about this. Everyone's struggling right now, right, with the whole health care thing. It was something of a debacle. So Cohn told me the tax thing is going to be a little different. I want you to take a listen to this.
Yes.
We're just starting down the path of taxes. And unlike health care, we are out talking to all the groups that are going to be interested in our tax plan. We've met with the Freedom Caucus. We're continuously going out and meeting with groups. We're going to meet with industry groups. By the time we get a bill drafted, we're going to know everyone's issues. We're going to have dealt with those issues. And we think it's going to make it substantially easier to get that through Congress.
All right, David, you buying that?
No. I think he ought to go back to Goldman Sachs and trade commodities or whatever he does that he knows about. He's clueless about legislative politics. There is not going to be a tax cut this year or probably next year. To get a tax cut of the magnitude they're talking about, they need a budget resolution that incorporates another 10 or 12 trillion of national debt. The Freedom Caucus isn't going to vote for it. The Democrats aren't going to help. We're going to get stuck by summer in the debt ceiling crisis because we're out of borrowing authority, we'll be out of cash, and they're not going to even get to tax reduction till sometime next year.
I did push him. I think it's great to be ambitious, but I think maybe a little bites here and there probably. You're going to be with us for the hour, so hang in there, Dave.